Hello and welcome to this new episode of our podcast Peace Today, where we talk with people from all over the world who are invested in building a more peaceful world. We talk to many different kinds of people, journalists, academics, former politicians, ambassadors, and today I'm very happy that I can speak to a special guest, filmmaker Anastasia Trofimova. Anastasia, most welcome to our podcast. The reason why you're here in the Netherlands is the screening of your movie or documentary, Russians at War. This actually has raised a lot of concern and a lot of protest even. And as you told me, actually every place almost where the screening is organized, there is a lot of controversy built around it. Why is this the case, do you think?
Thank you for having me here. And that's a great question. So, just a bit of a background about Russians at War. We had our first premiere on September 5th, 2024 at the Venice Film Festival. And that went very smoothly. There was not a single protest. We had a 5-minute standing ovation. We had a lot of complimentary reviews from the press of this being a very nuanced anti-war film that really shows how awful the ongoing war is. And we were often compared to All Quiet on the Western Front, a film that won 4 Oscars a few years back, because it really showed the war beyond the slogans. And that has not been done from the Russian side of the war for the last, as long as the war has been going on. Then it started to change when the Ukrainian state heard about this film, and they protested it without having ever seen it, and called upon their network to protest it as well. So pretty much after Venice, every single festival that we had, they had the Ukrainian ambassador trying to contact the festival and trying to censor this film, trying to make sure that it was not shown. And after what followed were the Ukrainian community centers, the institutes, advocates, and similar groups. Now, they have not seen the film, and I know that for a fact several festivals invited them to come watch it and have a discussion, and they refused to. So it was always a curiosity for us, how is it possible to try to censor something that you have not seen? And what were the reasons for that? And we had a very interesting conversations. My producer, my team, had a very interesting conversation with someone with I can't really say the name of the group, but it was in Canada, and it was a Ukrainian-Canadian group that reached out to one of our advocates and said that they cannot allow this film to be screened because this will undermine the war effort. Because he didn't continue to expand on his thought, but I would assume that in order to have a coherent war effort, you have to demonize the enemy, you have to demonize the people and the nation you are waging war against. And that is not a path to peace, that is a path to continue the war. But those were the efforts. And on my side, I want to do the opposite. I would like the war to end, because I would like for people to see the ugliness of the war.
That was my next question, actually. And we'll talk about this commotion and this the troubles that you experience in showing this movie also later. But what was your first reason why you wanted to make this documentary?
Yeah, sure. Well, my own motivations evolved as I made the film. My first reason was that I wanted to see what the war was like and who was fighting the war. Because being inside Russia, when the war began, it was a complete chaos. We had no idea this war would happen. For me, it was absolutely out of the blue, because I was trying to convince everyone who I knew that the war is not going to start. I did not believe it for a second. And most of the people around me also did not believe that this war would happen. So my first reason was to try to figure out who are the people who are fighting this war, because at that point we had 2 competing narratives about it. We had the Russian state media, which is basically portraying them as heroes who never die. And we have mostly in the Western media, who are portraying them as war criminals who rape and pillage and kill.
Mm-hmm.
And I just could not believe, that our world was so turned upside down that we had to live between these two binaries.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to go and see for myself what it was all about.
What did you discover?
I discovered that they were regular people who were caught up in a completely irregular situation. And God forbid, but the human condition is such that a war can happen in any country because of some higher political plan. And all of us, as regular people who are not affecting politics, can end up in their place. We can end up in the place of these Russian soldiers if our government chooses to go to war. And how we act when that happens will depend purely on our personal beliefs, on our personal fears, on our principles, and such. Most of the people there also did not believe that the war was going to happen, but it did. And so they were people who were caught up in a situation that did not ask their permission, but it changed around them. And they had to sort of just go on.
But some of you might say some of these people, or many of these people, are draftees. They have no choice. They are called up and have to go. But some of them, you can say, are volunteers, so they are voluntarily there. So would you make the same judgment about them?
I would definitely, for me, when I went to the front, my goal was to understand them, because there was already so much judgment about the soldiers without understanding and without knowing who they are. Most of the people who talk about Russian soldiers have never met a Russian soldier in their life, and that's important to understand, because it is very difficult to get to them, yes. But also because there is this fog of war that's happening, and a lot of the war drum is beating on many sides, not just inside Ukraine, but also in countries of the West. So how would you go and talk to the enemy, quote unquote, the enemy, if it's considered to be almost unbecoming? And that's the strange thing for me in this war. So there are a lot of volunteers, and when I went there, I wanted to figure out what they were all about. I went there, and it was very important for me to remove this fog of war from my own vision, and to try to see these people for what they are and why they went, and figure out the psychology of them. A lot of them went for, they all went for different reasons. There were people who were drafted, of course. So people who were drafted, they were regular civilians who were working in factories and all kinds of jobs, and they just got their draft notice and they had to go. They had no choice. There were people who were in the regular army before the war began, so they might not have known that the war was about to start, but they had no choice either. And the people who volunteered, they went for different reasons. So some went because they wanted to protect the country, because in their world they were told that Russia is being under attack from the West. And the West, or NATO, is using Ukraine to do its dirty work for them. That was their point of view, and it was interesting to hear that, because we haven't heard that before. Some went because they were, as many soldiers, they were trying to escape something in their personal life. And some went for the salary, which is very high. And so it was important to go there and to actually speak to them and to see that. And I think the fact that we go and we see one another, that's something that could contribute to understanding and hopefully peace.
So, that's actually, I wanted to ask you, what is you actually mentioned already some of these things, but maybe you can say it again. What is the main message you want people to have after seeing this movie, this documentary?
I want people to make up their own minds. I want people to understand that this war has been an abomination in terms of media coverage. It has been completely unequal in terms of the stories coming out from the Russian side and stories coming out from the Ukrainian side. I want people to understand and to compare what they hear in their countries about how this war is being portrayed and what they see.
And in their countries, regardless whether that's Russia or
Absolutely.
the West. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you want to challenge the narratives on both sides.
I would like people to see the reality and then compare them to the narratives that they have. Because war is always about suffering, and war is always a catastrophe. But the problem is, if there is a desire to continue the war, we have to ask why, because it's definitely not for humanistic reasons.
So, for what reasons then, if it's not for humanistic reasons?
Is there a desire to continue the war?
Yes.
Well, that's a great question, and I think that definitely...
Maybe from both sides.
Yeah, it's a great question, but I think that warrants an investigation, which is sort of out of the scope of this film, because my desire for this film specifically was to tell human stories.
Yeah.
This is not in any way an analytical film that's talking about the causes of the war, the political actors who decided, and...
You're simply there asking simple questions to soldiers, that's it.
For me, I've had a really interesting conversation recently with someone who said that it's very important to have the big picture whenever you make a documentary film, which is to say who is the aggressor and who is the victim and provide the context. And I disagree, because the enemy du jour changes very fast. You can remember how yesterday, for example, Saddam Hussein was the best friend of the US. He was a son of a bitch, but he was our son of a bitch. And then all of a sudden he became the biggest threat. Politics changes fast. Enemies are, today they're an enemy, tomorrow they're a friend. But what to me the big picture is, and that's the big picture that we see in all classic literature, it's that ordinary man. To me, it's very important in a time of a catastrophe, in a time of in a very emotional place, not to lose sight of that ordinary man. And it's on his bones that big politics is being built, on all sides.
And that's, I think, one of the criticisms, I would say, because what people say, you normalize and humanize, not in a good way, but you humanize the aggressor, let's say. That's what people say around us who criticize the fact that we screen the movie. So it's about the normal man, but it's the Russian man who is part of the I'm saying what the perspective here is, that it's part of the aggressor. So what about the normal man in the Ukrainian trenches?
No, it's a great question, and I like questions like this because it gives us a chance to really rethink the way we have come to accept the dominant narrative. It's very important to tell the story of the regular man, of the ordinary man in the Ukrainian trenches. And it's being done. But it hasn't been done for the Russian side. It has not. So this is the first film, after Sean Langen's The Other Side, that is at least showing the reality of the Russian soldiers. And it's very important because every war should be covered from both sides. We should have stories from both sides. If there's a desire to censor one of the sides, then you must really ask why. Why is it inappropriate, as some people say, to humanize Russian soldiers? Are they not human?
Well, that's a great question, and I think the impression very often is that they are not in our media. If you read comments about it, and there's this kind of term that people use these days a lot, what is both sidism. Do you hear about it? So when it's about Israel-Palestine, or for instance, and there's always criticism that they say, we shouldn't pretend like this is an equal conflict. There, I'm talking about it. Can you do anything with that kind of criticism, or? Yeah,
of course. I mean, there is a term called both sides. The sidism. There is a term called censorship. So we can exchange terms until tomorrow, and that's totally fine. But when it comes to when we're talking about both sidism, what we actually mean, and people misuse this term, is that sometimes there are not both sides to an issue. Sometimes there are 3 sides. Sometimes there are 20 sides, and sometimes you have people who are not qualified to speak about an issue who somehow become a side. For example, when we were talking about the flat Earth. story. We have, you can say we have two sides. There's an opinion that the Earth is flat, and there's an opinion that the Earth is round. If you're going to say that both sides are equal, that's both sidism.
Yeah.
If you're going to say that the war must be covered from the perspectives of the two warring parties, that's not both sidism. And if you're trying to censor one of the sides, that's censorship. And why do we have censorship? Because we usually have wartime propaganda. And wartime propaganda exists, and it's actually the ideological enemy of documentary, because wartime propaganda needs to make sure that we have only one dominant narrative and one side which is good and the other side that is evil. It creates black and white, polarized, what we call binaries, and basically wants you to see as another side as being subhuman. But once you see the other side of being subhuman, that means you have been affected by wartime propaganda. Because look back at every single war that we remember. No matter how old you are, you probably already lived through several wars, not personally, hopefully, but at least you saw them from the side. Let's take the Rwandan genocide, for example. We have a purely and total dehumanization of the other side. Cockroaches that must be exterminated and all that kind of stuff. So we have the same idea happening in every single war. We have the Radio of a Thousand Hills, which was the Rwandan genocide channel, being employed, the same tactics are being employed in this war as well. There's an attempt to completely dehumanize the other side, because if you're fighting human beings, it's much more difficult to kill them. And if you're fighting animals, cockroaches, orcs, whatever you want to call them, then it's much more acceptable. And that's a sad thing. So, unfortunately, it seems like we live in an era of war, where war usually has some sort of triumph over peace, and it's very difficult for peace movements to oppose that. I mean, if you remember, the biggest protests in modern day history happened in 2003, where between January and April 2023, 36 million people protested the war in Iraq. Did that stop the war in Iraq? Unfortunately not. So again, we're coming back to the big picture. And the big picture is the ordinary person, whether that's the soldier or the protester. That's the ordinary person, and it's their story that we must tell in the background of these cataclysmic shifts.
So it's clear you want to show this human face, the human people that are suffering in the trenches, and outside, the mothers and the children and those who are left behind when people are dying at the front. But you start saying that there's very much two completely separate narratives in the West and Ukraine on the one hand, and in Russia on the other hand. So if you take your film and this message of the humanity, the face, the human face, like what would your message be then? What does this human face tell you on the one side, and what would your message be on the Russian side, let's say? What should Russian people know and realize, and what should we as Westerners know and realize?
I mean, that's a great question. And for me, I think after my first initial motivation to go and see who these people are, my second motivation was I want to create a document of history for Russians, because we do not see this war ourselves. I was growing up when the first Chechen war was started, and I remember that I was seeing dead bodies on television all the time. And this war was debated. There was a huge debate whether or not we are right, we are wrong, should this have been done any other way. There were protests, there were a committee of soldiers' mothers, who were going to Chechnya. There were journalists who managed to film both on the Chechen rebel side and on the Russian Federal Army side.
They were all on television.
Yes, and you could see that. And there was a debate. This war, I realized that if I don't do this, or if I don't try, because at that point I didn't know if I would be successful, then who will? We need to have a document of history for ourselves, first of all, to understand what it looked like and what that was like.
Because also for Russians there's no access to, let's say, the reality.
Well, you know, there are different bits of reality that come through, because in Russia we have, of course, our federal state channels. Then we have news that comes out on Telegram, because mostly Russians and Ukrainians, we all live on Telegram.
And it's pretty rough what you see there.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Yeah, it is. It's the war. That's what it looks like. But it's glimpses of. There's no one single
There's no human
picture.
story really. It's corpses and it's death and bombs.
There you can see like some short. Sometimes some short stories about someone, but it's not like you follow them. It's not like you get to live in their shoes. It's not like you understand them as a person. But that's the nature of the medium of Telegram. That's just the way it is. And it's great that it's there because at least we get to see something. But of course, I wanted to have a picture of reality and have this slice of reality for Russia. And that's the purpose of documentaries, I think. For me, it was like my duty, not only as a Russian, but my duty also as a documentarian to capture this moment.
And what should Russians be reminded of then when they see it? What should they, what awareness should they generate from this movie?
I mean, I would like for them to see it first, and again, I'm very careful in wanting to prescribe a certain reaction because I think when we try to dictate to an audience what they should think, that's already when we're trying to cross the line into something propagandistic. So I would like to see them, and just to each person who sees it, have their own reflection against the reality that they know to be true, against the narratives that they know to be true.
And I wonder, how has the movie been received in Russia?
It has not been shown in Russia.
It has not been shown. So nobody in Russia has seen it.
Well,
let's say no bigger.
Yeah, the soldiers, some of the soldiers that went through Moscow because they were either wounded or they were going on leave, I sat them down, I showed them a rough cut of the film. Because for me it was very important to hear them say that I did not make any mistakes, that this happened exactly the way it happened, and etc. And they said it was nothing like they've ever seen before. It was exactly right, and they have never seen this kind of work on any media in Russia or outside. So, but no, in Russia it has not been screened, and we're currently working on designing a website, and so the film will be available on VOD for anyone. They can basically rent it and watch it, and then at the same time we will have a Russian version, which will be available for free in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, because these are the countries that are most affected by this war, and it's for them that I wanted to have this film. Russia first, and then these two.
So, and then about the film itself, one of the things that surprised me most, actually, that I saw so much crying. I didn't expect that, actually. I expected a lot of rough, tough people, going about their business. But almost everyone that you interviewed had to cry at some point. Were you surprised by that, or?
I was surprised by how regular they were. Yeah, because I think the rough, tough image that we have of people in uniform, it's an image that's important for an army to project, but I think the rougher and tougher the person is, the more harder they cry when push comes to shove.
Maybe, It's a sort of a protection shield.
Because you are in a situation where your life is not in your hands. Your life can be taken away from you, but more importantly, the life of people who you become friends with can be taken away from you. And there's nothing you can do about that. It's just this.
So, at many points in the documentary, you feel people are somehow frustrated. Soldiers are frustrated about things. They are unhappy. What are they exactly unhappy about? Or what do they vent their frustrations about?
Well, I mean, different soldiers, they have different frustrations. But I think overall, there was a kind of disappointment and a lot of questions about why the war is going as slowly as it's going. And this was, I think, shared by the civilians who are living still in eastern Ukraine, where the Russian army is located. And there was almost a kind of a theory going about that it's some sort of agreement between the warring sides to prolong the war. And that's what one of the characters says, and this thought has been echoed several times that I've been there. So a lot of them, of course, they feel like the war is...
But do they then feel the war is slow and it should go faster, or is it the war is slow and we are losing, or is it what kind of theories do they have behind it?
There's more of a confusion, let's say, about why the pacing is the way it is, why the front line isn't moving, because the front line has actually not moved for most of 2023 and most of 2024. Now there is some movement from the Russian side, but still it comes with, a lot of questions about why it's the way it is, because it seems to be directly tied to any potential negotiations, to politics, to this kind of stuff. But you have two levels of this war. You have politicians trying to negotiate or not trying to negotiate, we don't know. And then you have the situation on the ground. So the situation on the ground is quite tragic, I think, for both sides.
So you say the film wasn't actually received yet in Russia, and it will be in the future. Do you think this will generate any problems for the people involved? I mean, some people, and what people don't realize who criticize it, is that people are very often, the soldiers are very frank about what they like and don't like. Is there any repercussions for these people that you show? There's a mother in the end who wonders later, when history will be written about this war, my son died, and what can we say our children? What was this war good for? So she actually makes a very, you might say, even demoralizing comment about the war, and that she doesn't believe in what Russia is doing.
No, it's a great question. When it comes to the mother, I mean, she just lost her son. She, I think, as many people who lost someone, for them the greater ideological reasoning will not bring their loved one back. It was her only son. She had a daughter, but it was her only son. So for her, what is it all for? Her son was the most important thing. And when it comes to the soldiers, I ran this film through 4 Russian lawyers who are knowledgeable in military and censorship cases. And because for me it was mostly important, the most important thing was that I don't get anybody in trouble. So their safety was paramount for me. Because as a documentary filmmaker, you have a responsibility before your subjects, your characters, because you're like a doctor in any way. You cannot do any harm. So when the lawyers saw that, they said that no, the soldiers should be fine because they're expressing a personal opinion about a situation that they are in currently now. They're not talking about politics from the safety of their couch. They're talking about themselves personally, and it's a personal opinion, so it's within, kind of what's permitted.
Acceptable.
Yeah. So in terms of, that was the most important thing. So repercussions for them, hopefully it should be fine. Yeah.
So I wonder if we look at the reactions in the West. We've started talking about that. There are some allegations that some you already addressed, but there's also in the statement of the ambassador they say. First of all, some people say, I don't know if they state it straightforwardly, but it's Russian sanctioned, let's say, state propaganda. And then secondly, they say you went to the front illegally. Actually, you crossed the border, so you were in violation. You were an aggressor yourself, basically. So how would you address those comments?
I love those comments. So when it comes to the Ukrainian ambassador, we actually have a collection of Ukrainian ambassadors' letters that we keep, our team, and they mostly talk about the same thing. It's a film they have not seen. They have no way to prove that it's sanctioned by Russia, but they need to somehow make the film look bad So if it is sanctioned by Russia, therefore you should not watch it, and therefore you should not consider Russians as humans. Stick to the narrative, do not stray away from the narrative. This film, of course, was not sanctioned by any state, including Russia, because if you look at Russian state television, you would never see people even crying. It's something we don't see. That's why this film could not be sanctioned. That's why I could not go even with permissions, even if I could apply for them, but I couldn't, because I was not working for an outlet at that time. So, no, this film was not sanctioned by Russia. This film is not Russian propaganda, and the way to...
But they say you could only have arrived at the front with some sort of permission from the Russian army.
Yeah, because they're such experts about how to work in Russia, aren't they?
I don't know.
So, Russia... Yeah, like I think the other thing that you should know is that it's not my first war. Yeah. So I've been getting into war zones.
Maybe you can say where you have been.
Sure. So I have been in Iraq, Syria, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's the latest. And when I was filming in Raqqa, which is the capital of ISIS, in 2017, we were the only documentary crew that was allowed to stay with medics, with the women's units, and with the international volunteers who fought ISIS.
From the Kurdish side?
From the Kurdish side, yeah, from the Kurdish side. And so at that point the Kurds did not allow anybody to go to the front. And we had a lot of our colleagues who tried to fight that, but it was very difficult to negotiate because the Kurds, they wanted to maintain their own protocol and safety procedures. But I managed to talk them into allowing us because we were a documentary film and we had to stay with the subjects and sort of live with their lives and get inside their skin and show the viewer what it was like. And so we managed to convince them to stay close, and then when some of our characters went to the front, we obviously followed them. So we did things that were not allowed in Syria, in Iraq, in DRC. And this is what you do as a documentary filmmaker. And it's not like you do it because you want to have a gotcha moment against someone. It's because you want to tell a human story in a situation in some sort of cataclysm. And that's what you do. And so here, to be honest, I never really thought that I would be able to pull it off. I thought when I first went over there, I will be arrested and thrown out. But as with any war zone, it's a little bit chaotic, and a lot of it depends on the human factor. If you remember, if you've ever read the autobiography of Robert Capa, one of the greatest photographers, World War II photographers, the man was Hungarian, so at that point that was an enemy nation. The man had no passport because his passport stayed in Hungary, and obviously Hungary would not issue him a new one because he was in the US, and that he also became an enemy national. And he managed to go to the front, not only without a press pass or any permissions, but also without a passport. And that's what you do. That's the whole tradition of the game, of documentary, whether it's photography or filmmaking.
In war zones.
In war zones. So no, this film, again, has not been sanctioned. It is not authorized, and it's not propaganda. And the Ukrainian state, which has vested interest in fighting this war, is obviously going to continue saying that it is propaganda. But again, the difference is, you either, for propaganda, you have to make a black and white narrative. It has to be incredibly emotional, and you have to keep repeating it, which is what the Ukrainian state is doing with labeling our film propaganda. Our film makes you ask questions. It shows you nuance, and it has no prescribed answers. And that's the point of documentary.
It does make you cry, though.
Yeah. And as for the second thing, that I entered this war illegally, did they expect me to call up Kiev and get permissions? And then show up with these permissions to the Russian commander and say, hey, I have a permission from Kiev, I should be there? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, all right, no, that's clear. So you have already alluded to it several times, but maybe still the question, why do you think they are so afraid of us seeing this movie? Going out of their way, pulling their ambassadors forward, writing letters, organizing social support and demonstrations around this screening. Because if you have seen the movie, the documentary, you will convinced of what you just said, that it's absolutely no propaganda. I mean, in no way does it glorify Russia or the Russian war effort, or does it give imagery that is derogatory to Ukrainians. On the, I would say the reverse. You know, people are very saddened by the fact that there is this war. So you could almost see it as an if it is propaganda, then it is anti-war propaganda. Let's say that's how I would say it. I don't want to put more words in your mouth, but why? So actually, I think it's kind of strange that they chose your film as a point of them to protest about. And so why do you think we should not see this film according to them?
It's a good question, and it's very important for us also to try to put ourselves in their shoes also, the people who protest this film. I think, in a way, I understand that there are a lot of people who suffered on the Ukrainian side.
Yes.
And I fully empathize with that, because I don't think this war should have happened.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that we should have had all these funerals on the Ukrainian side, on the Russian side, because these are two neighboring countries that I think have a lot more in common than different. And I think for the past 3 years, there has been this unequal coverage in the media, showing Ukrainian stories that made the audiences here see the Russian side as the enemy, right? And so when you've been exposed to that for over 3 years, and you have a film that comes and shows you the enemy, you immediately feel like this is some sort of trick. Mm-hmm. And all you need is a little spark to get people going, those who are really, kind of, how can I say it, agitated or aggravated because of the war.
Or emotional. Yeah.
Emotional because of the war. And of course the spark would come from a side that's vested in the war, which is the Ukrainian state. And its institutions, which is the embassies, the cultural organizations that they work with, and all these kinds of things. So, unfortunately, these political efforts to continue the war, they play on emotions of people who are good people. They believe that they're doing something right. They're supporting people who have suffered, and this is their way to support. They do not support them by going to the war, that they inadvertently, in a way, work to continue. Yeah. They do not support it in actually being on the front and seeing what the war is all about. They support it in trying to censor a documentary film. And in a way, it is a paradox for me, but it's very important to understand how people's desire to defend and protect those they feel who are victims can lead them to straying away from some sort of humanism that they thought they had.
Did you talk to Ukrainians about this? I mean, one of the soldiers is Ukrainian, but he's from, let's say, the Russian side of Ukraine. But did you talk to any Ukrainians about what you saw and what you think?
Yeah, I did.
Who are on the other side? Let's say.
I did, yeah.
And how do they feel about it, or what do they tell you?
So we had very interesting conversations with Ukrainians. Not many, because of obvious reasons.
Yes.
But it's always interesting to hear their perspective, and the fact that, I mean, I don't want to give away too much information because I don't want to put anybody in danger, because we should not.
No.
Yeah.
Let me ask it differently. Is there any dialogue possible in the near future between Ukrainians and Russians about this war?
I think there is. I think definitely there is. I mean, you know, the interesting thing is that Ukrainians and Russians outside, they do get along. They do have, you know, projects together. There are NGOs that help both Ukrainians and Russians, and they still cooperate and do things. And sometimes the advocates for Ukraine, they're more radical than the Ukrainians themselves, because people who live through the war, they are tired of the war.
Yeah.
They don't want it to continue.
So I don't know if it's a fair question to ask you as a filmmaker, but do you have any ideas of how this war should end?
Well, I mean, as a filmmaker, I probably can't really answer that. But as a person, I think this war has to end in negotiations. Because for the last 3 years, it's been obvious that no side is going to win militarily. And we also have to take into consideration that Russia has not been using all its arsenal against Ukraine. Far from it. So there is a sort of this meat grinder of the war that keeps taking lives. No side is winning, and the fact that there's still a push for a military solution to me is a war crime. Is a crime against humanity.
From both sides.
Huh?
From both sides.
From the sides that do not want to negotiate.
Yes.
Because how many more people have to die before, you know, politicians say it's enough? For me, it was enough already.
Yeah, of course.
So I really hope that it is possible to negotiate, because more lives should not be thrown away to this machine.
And I was kind of surprised, maybe I shouldn't have been, by the way first that Trump made his, let's say, 180 in the policy of the US. I didn't expect it to come so suddenly, and I'm still skeptical about any results about it. But I was even more shocked that Europe didn't want to go along with that and wanted very openly to continue this war. So for that, so I agree with your statement when it comes to, I said it myself many times that, you know, pushing this war further is just only prolonging the suffering and is not helping Ukraine in any way. How is it on the Russian side? Do people see it that way as well? Do they see, or what is the sentiment, would you say?
I've worked a lot with foreign correspondents who are based still in Russia, who still work in Russia. And it was actually one of the first questions that they asked anywhere we went, because we went to all kinds of small cities, and to get sort of a pulse.
Yes.
And everyone we've met, even people who support the front, like they gather things to send to the soldiers, they all said the same thing, that they wish the war would be over. And I can tell you that, for example, where I lived on the first front, where we were based with where this battalion was based that I was filming, at some point I was the only one that had access to the internet, because every week I would leave to take a taxi to a city that had the Wi-Fi to basically check in and to do stuff. And every time that I would come back from the city, there would be a group of soldiers gathering around me and asking me, what's the latest news in Moscow? Are they negotiating yet?
Oh, really?
When is the war going to be done? Nobody wants to be there. I think nobody wants this war to continue, but it is. And that's the biggest tragedy. Because we have so many slogans outside the war, about a war, that they have not seen up close, how it should continue, how it's all about valor, how it's all about bravery. And all these slogans that basically push the meat grinder, the handle of the meat grinder to turn. And you have the people who are dying and suffering every day, but it's not their opinion that matters. And that's a tragedy.
So, 2 more questions, because I know I take a lot of your time. So what is there a step that Russia should take, according to you, in order to make that happen? Or do you think we're on the right track with Trump, etc.? I mean, from the West we can say what we want, but you are seeing it from a different perspective that we don't hear very often.
I mean, I'm not, to be honest...
I mean, you're not a politician.
I'm not a politician, yes, so it's a bit hard to say what about Trump or about Putin. Intuitively, I wouldn't really say that Trump is a friend
No.
of Putin or of Russia, because Trump is a politician who should have his country's interests first. So, and I'm not sure what the game is that he and his allies are playing there, but I wouldn't really jump on the bandwagon to scream that he's Putin's best buddy, he's being used by Putin. I really don't think so. But again, I'm not a politician. I think that in any case, there has to be difficult decisions made, because I think at this point, the sides, at least officially in their official rhetoric, have sort of dug in to their positions, and it's like whoever blinks first is the loser. So whoever gives in first is the loser. And while they're playing the staring contest, you have the handle of the war's meat grinder turning and turning.
Exactly.
So the sides have to find ways to negotiate, but this is the art of diplomacy that has to happen. And I would prefer for this art of diplomacy to happen, because as one great thinker said, 10 years of negotiations is better than 1 day of war. And I really, really believe that. So somehow they have to give in and find a way, but that's what responsible politicians do. And that would be a politician that I would respect. So far, what I have seen over the last 3 years is this increasing war hysteria, that we already started to talk about World War III and not be scared about it. I mean, we're still scared about it, but it also almost became a normality. And that's scary.
And you mean a normality in both Russia and the West?
In both Russia and the West, yeah. So in both Russia and the West, we're talking about the possibility of a nuclear war, and it's not a joke. We're talking about the possibility of World War III, and it's not a joke, and that's the scary part.
Yes.
So politicians, they have to be responsible and find a way to finish the war. The politicians who are obviously not interested in finishing the war do not have my respect whatsoever, because they should really see it. They should really see what it's like.
Yes.
And then I would really like to see if their opinion changes, and I hope it does, because anybody who has been close to the war knows that this is not something that we should do as humanity.
So, if I may ask, you've seen many war zones already. You've been, I can even imagine, around death and destruction and wounded people and suffering and mourning people about their family, etc. in many places already, and also now in Ukraine and Russian people. So is there, in the process of making the film, what will stay with you most, you think?
You know, I think before I started going to these places, I was also more, I had the mentality more of like an activist. There's a good side and a bad side, and yes, there are people on both sides, but still, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I think this experience, what it has taught me, is that the human condition is such that we all have our affiliations and our attachments to our country, to our religious group, to our ethnic group, to something that's bigger than us. And those attachments are exploited for political reasons. But we, as ordinary people, do that out of love. So our feeling of love to something bigger than us is exploited sometimes. And at the end of the day, we still have people. There are people on both sides, on all sides of any war. And it's the systems that govern those people are the ones that need to be altered and changed, because systems are possible to change. It's just we have to realize that they're there, name them, and realize what needs to be altered. But it's not people themselves. I don't believe that people inherently are evil. People have the ability to do harm to others, and usually it's because they are being told that they have to defend the thing that they are attached to, and that's the paradox. You learn to see the paradoxes of the human condition and not to simplify them, because the more you simplify them, the more unprepared you are for the next thing that will happen. And for the history of humanity that keeps repeating the same things.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. It's really you're not only a great filmmaker, but also still an activist, I think, and a philosopher in a way that you can reflect on it very impressively. And thank you so much. Thanks for your bravery, because you go out of the way to show things that we otherwise would have never seen. And thank you also for being capable of humanizing the faces who are actually fighting the war, and not on their own free will often, but because of their part of these systems. Unfortunately, we don't have time to analyze those systems. I would have loved that as well. But it is. Thank you so much. I hope as many people as possible will see this film. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and your opinions and your views on the world here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.